We were speaking last time of the difficulties of the intellect in getting an adequate idea of the supramental consciousness and an organization of life based upon that consciousness. Mother refers to another way of knowing, not the intellectual way, but the way of feeling the truth or the supramental consciousness or anything near it by deepening our own awareness. She speaks of a divine presence within us at all levels of our being. We should learn to become aware of it by aspiration, by will, by quest. And when we become mentally aware of the presence of the divine in or around us, we should dig it in till the cells in our body, they spring with that awareness. They vibrate with their newly discovered identity with the divine consciousness. When the cells in the body awake to this truth of divine consciousness, then the body begins to respond directly without having to be educated or coaxed by our mental will. And of all the understandings, Mother points out, understanding with the body is the most direct, most infallible, and most concrete. That is why she has always laid so much stress upon activizing the cells in our physical body. That is one topic that was left over from the last discussion. Then there is the question of what is mental honesty. Sri Aurobindo himself refers in his letters, and Mother also does it. And when they speak of mental honesty, we can understand physical honesty, keeping one's word, doing what one says one is doing. That kind of honesty we understand. But a mental honesty, that needs a little bit of self-observation and self-scrutiny. Usually, our mind is busy in justifying itself, justifying our course of action in fulfillment of our desires. To put it differently, the mind is always at the service of the desire being. Whatever course of action we choose in fulfillment of a desire that moves us, our mind is ready to give an explanation. Something in us may question us. Am I doing the right thing? And immediately the mind rolls off a number of reasons why what we are doing is the right thing. And it takes pains to satisfy our external mind, the standards that we have imposed upon ourselves, that what we are doing is correct. Similarly, when anything goes wrong and we are questioned, the first impulse is one of self-defense. Even before the charge is made against us, when we are asked, it may be even for information, the tone that we adopt, the attitude that we take is to defend ourselves, that it is not due to me. But that is not the point. Even when others do not ask, anything happens, known only to ourselves, the first impulse is to justify ourselves, to put the blame on somebody else. This is the usual mental operation. But at times, when we are awake, when our moral sense or the spiritual sense is alive, we do perceive that our mental reasoning is not correct. It is shown to us that our mental argument is not right, it is not honest. At that time, knowing full well that what we are doing is not true, to put a veil over it and continue to do what we have been doing, that is called mental dishonesty. It is natural perhaps for the mind in a state of ignorance to enter pleas of self-justification. But once something in us, maybe a more enlightened part of the mind, recognizes that it is an error, that it is not correct, still to persist in it, ignore the warning, that is mental dishonesty, a sure step towards spiritual or yogic ruination. The only way out, you kindly meet me afterwards, after the class is over, yourself, you will meet me a little later before you go. The only way in which we can cure ourselves of this normal disease of mental dishonesty is that once we recognize, we have to take action, not to hide it, from ourselves. We may hide things from others, but certainly we can't hide things from ourselves, much less from Him who dwells within us. The more advanced way is to rise above falsehood. We are subject to the dualities of life. We allow ourselves to be driven by elements of ignorance and falsehood. By means yogic or ethical, whatever it is, we have to make a special effort to rise at least in our mental thinkings above falsehood. We spoke of the divine presence, the divine influence which guides, which shows us the error of our ways, maybe in an action of a second. Now from where does this consciousness, does this presence really come? Explaining it to the children, mother refers to an old occult tradition, older than the Indian tradition or the Chaldean tradition. In fact, the mother tradition of both, according to which when the creative divine started on his career of manifestation, of creation of this universe, he delegated 4 projections of himself, 4 beings of knowledge, of light, of love, knowledge, life, light, and consciousness. Now these beings emanated from the divine creative Godhead on their career. They were so full of themselves, so full of their power, that each one decided to go on his own. Each one chose to forget his origin, to forget his source in the divine. And in pursuing this line of action, they moved away from their original truth and reached their culmination. Knowledge became ignorance, light became darkness, life became death, consciousness became inconscience, nations. It was at that time that the creative power, which was in charge of the whole project, to use the modern terminology, seeing that things have reached an untoward and an unexpected end, this power appealed to the Supreme for help, and the divine put forward another being consisting of love and grace to save the world, to bring it back on the rails, so to say, and reset the creative movement on its destined course. This being is described in the old tradition to which Mother refers as a large person lying stretched out somewhere at the bottom of the universe. Emanating from himself more and more charges of consciousness, so that the divine consciousness could manifest, could organize itself. It is there to ensure the efflorescence of the divine consciousness. And Mother incidentally mentions that in her own vision she had seen this being, but the being which Mother saw was golden in color and crimson in its glory. That differed somewhat in complexion from the being that is lying stretched at the root of the universe. Now, lying there, this divine being goes on emanating more and more doses of consciousness, and it will continue till the whole of the universe is imbued with the divine consciousness. To put it in other words, till the universe becomes the total avatar of the divine, this action of grace, of love, that will continue. There is also the action of direct descents, apart from the action of the divine concealed in the inconscient base. There is a periodical special action of direct descents from the Supreme. They are what we call the avatars. Specific assignments with which lesser emanations are put forth, they are called the vibhutis. The next topic is the usual question whether one is in touch with the reality within. Call it truth, call it the psychic, call it God, whatever it is. How is one to know that one has contacted and is in touch, living touch with the divine or the reality within? Mother's answer is, when one needs to ask this question, it means the contact is not at fault. There may be some influence, there may be periods of linkage, but a real contact is not at fault. Because a real contact with the divine within is not a matter of just one experience. That you get an experience and you embody it, gradually it gets diluted, and you feel it was a matter of the past. It is not that. A series of such experiences, perhaps, that is the normal course, build up a state of realization, when you get into firm touch, contact with the reality within. And when that contact is established, then there is a radical change in the consciousness. A person becomes a totally new person, and he can never be the old person again. There is no question of diminution, no question of dilution. Not only his consciousness becomes new, but his whole attitude to life undergoes a radical change. He can no more function from the standpoint of ego. It will jar on such a person to think or to talk or to act in terms of ego. Whatever are known as the soul values, nobility, love, benevolence, truth, harmony, these will be the terms in which he will express himself. So one does not need to be told that you are in touch. One can know for oneself, and those around can know, whatever the appearances, the emanations, the vibrations that such a person emanates, keep him above the common run of humanity. There is in himself a decisive sense of liberation. He never feels bound. The sense of being caged in the body, physical body, is absent. There is always a sense of absence of body. When one wants, one can fix it. But normally, one lives in consciousness. It is a matter of experience, which I'm sure many of you have had during meditation, when you suddenly feel that you don't have your skull, the head, that the top of the head, you don't feel it. You feel as if everything is one. Now the same thing happens on a larger scale. In the case of those whose consciousness is liberated, they live without being conscious of the bonds. That explains a remark made by the Maharshi at Arunachal once, that one does not know whether it is the body that carries the soul or the soul that carries the body. That is the feel. To be in contact with the reality within totally gives a totally new perspective and a new consciousness, which doesn't permit any of these intellectual questions to be posed. But before we can arrive at that state, we have to cultivate the faculty of awaking to the spiritual presence, not only in ourselves, but in the world, but in others. Intellectually, mentally, we must first accept the truth that there is a divine presence in all forms. And this presence, Mother describes, is perceived by those whose spiritual vision is open as a kind of shining point of light, even in the case of animals. And it is because of this shining point that things are organized in each form, in each scheme, individual scheme. There are a million individual schemes in one total scheme. In each scheme, things are held together without being allowed to be disrupted in this world of flux, because of the presence of this spiritual point of light. Otherwise, the world would not last for 2 minutes. There are such tremendous forces in movement, forces clashing, battling, that the whole world would have gone to blazes but for the steadying, coordinating and harmonizing and supporting presence of the divine. Once we have this conception, we should seek to see that presence, feel that presence, even in our enemies, even in those for whom we have no particular love. There are catastrophes, no doubt. There are accidents, but they are in the game. That a catastrophe is not allowed to be a total catastrophe is due to this deliberate presence of the divine. Whether this spiritual presence is different from the spiritual being is a question that naturally followed this discussion. And the answer is, the presence is there in all. But a being, a spiritual being, is something more. That presence has to concretize itself. We or nature have to build it, give it a shape, give it a form by evolution, by experience, and make it an entity of itself. From a point, it has to be developed into a shape into an entity, and then an individualized formation called the being, which assumes conscious control over the rest of the being, the rest of the multiple complex consisting of the mind, the vital, and the physical, and even below the physical. That being comes as a result of long evolution. And usually you can say that it is when this being is formed, it becomes conscious, that one begins to aspire for spiritual life. Spiritual life, the aspiration for spiritual life comes only when that level is reached, when the spiritual being inside is formed and claims a right to participate in the evolutionary movement and lead the rest of the being to its spiritual destination. Till then, the aspiration, the seeking may be mental. It may be temporary, but it doesn't last. But once that inner being is awake, there is no going back. When it asserts itself and sounds its call, one has to proceed on the journey, taking what Sri Aurobindo describes, the pilgrim stuff. Sri Aurobindo speaks in the Life Divine of 4 activities in which we can study the movement of nature in building up man to take to the quest of the divine. And they are religion, occultism, spiritual thought, spiritual realization. In the beginnings, in all societies, this urge from within takes the form of religion, an awareness of a presence beyond us, around us, a necessity to enlist its help in our struggle for life, the adoption of a system of rituals, ceremonies, formulas to establish communion with the god or gods. This phase is called the religion, meaning exactly what the word means originally, to tie you back to God. As religion develops, there is slight shift in emphasis. One becomes aware of the existence of a number of forces and beings behind the physical surface, governing our life, individual and universal. Sciences are developed, techniques are developed to establish contact with these nature forces which are not patent but occult. Faith in God is not necessary for this knowledge. It is more or less a science. So this is called, this pursuit of knowledge of the hidden side of nature in order to acquire control over the movements of nature. This is called occultism, the total scheme. But from religion, usually they go to the mental level. That is, they think out philosophy, metaphysics. They think out what could be the nature of the universe, what could be the nature of man's original being, what could be the goal of life. They pretend to see that many things in religion are superstitious. So what could be the truth? So the intellect takes a lead, reasons, organizes its ideas, and formulates what we call spiritual philosophies. Spiritual in the sense that these philosophies aim to link man with the truth of his life. But that doesn't satisfy man. It gives him a warmth of intellect, a warmth of intellectual knowledge, but nothing more. So, those who are more developed, those who are more serious in their quest, they take to spiritual experience, spiritual realization. And this is the highest step that has been taken by nature so far in the evolution of humanity. Beginning with religion, passing through occultism, developing that religion is mostly organized on the physical plane, impinging upon our physical senses through its rich ritual, litany, worship, and all that. The next, occultism, implying interchange with the forces and beings of the occult, the vital plane, the life plane. It means it links us with the vital plane of existence. The next, spiritual philosophy, naturally takes man to the intellectual plane. And the spiritual experience, spiritual realization, takes to the level of the spiritual being. For an integral development, all are needed. It will not do to condemn one simply because that is not relevant to one's own needs. Before one has become spiritual, one has doubtless passed through a stage of religious life, of occult interest, of intellectual conviction, seeking intellectual climate conviction, before one has landed into spiritual experience. In Sri Aurobindo's scheme of life, nothing can be rejected. All has its place. Only we must find the sense, the inner sense, to place each thing in its right place. There is nothing that is totally good or totally bad, totally virtuous, totally sinful. Placed in the right places, all tend to be necessary bricks in the general edifice that is being raised. The pursuit of yoga helps us in this coordination of the different levels of development by linking us with the psychic consciousness. The psychic consciousness, as we have known, is behind, holding together and governing this complex of the physical, the vital, and the mental, and the spiritual. Behind all is the psychic, and the psychic consciousness it is, which is to be awakened and made a governing power in our life.
things you mentioned about the body. I remember the statement
question is, apropos what we said, that the true understanding comes with the understanding by the body. From this point of view, how do we take Jung's approach that there is a level in the body which understands everything, and no real mental knowledge is possible unless one is able to relate to that knowledge in the body. This is, I would say, this is partly true and partly not true, because the knowledge that the mind attains is of a different kind than the knowledge of the body. The knowledge of the body is a knowledge of identity, but a knowledge obtained through the mental apparatus is a knowledge of ratiocination, logical conclusion, a mental perception. As mind functions in its present stage, it does not get, it has no access to the knowledge of identity. The mind has to die to itself, allowing the deeper consciousness to emerge and absorb that knowledge by identity. Then only it may express itself through the mind. But a normal mental knowledge is not derived directly from knowledge by identity, which is the character of the body. Now, how far it is true that there is a level in the body which knows what he means by that level, we do not know. If we are to be guided by his other writings, he means the unconscious. We will say there is a supremely conscious layer in the body. That alone is capable of knowledge by identity. We have to make an effort to delve into that depth and awaken that consciousness. That consciousness is asleep. We have to awake. How do we awake? By exerting pressure of a higher consciousness upon it, so that from the cells that consciousness springs up. So I do not think there can be a direct relation between our mental knowledge and the body's knowledge by identity. They speak of the body's instinct. Instinct is a name which they give to the lower form of intuition. But even this intuition of the body can only be a window, can only be a step towards knowledge by identity. It is an end product of a process. The difficulty comes because the same terms are employed with different significances in the two philosophies.
occultism and yoga.
There need not be any difference between yoga and occultism, in the sense that occultism is the art and science of knowing the play of forces behind the physical level in the universe and getting control over them. This is certainly a part of yoga, which is to become more and more conscious of our being and of life around us. So occultism can be a very useful branch of yogic development. But what happens normally in the present state of ignorance of the world is that the power given by occult knowledge is used not with an enlightened consciousness in fulfillment of the intention of God, but for egoistic aggrandizement. And that leads one away from the spiritual ideal. That is why in the older traditions they said, beware of these occult powers, shun them, they are unspiritual. Sri Aurobindo, I believe, is the first spiritual figure of his stature to have said that it is a superstition to regard the use of occult powers as unspiritual. It is nothing different from utilizing the powers of physical nature like electricity, steam, and these powers. All depends upon the intention with which you use, the purpose for which you utilize your knowledge. So occultism can be a very useful province of spiritual life. So much so that once in our class on the playground, mother said that anyone who wants to have this occult knowledge, she will guide, she will help in the fullness of time. Many of those people who are present, they started writing letters that we want to learn occultism from you. We want to learn occultism from you. So, what is your age? What is your age? My age is 9, my age is 10. Then said, mother said, first grow up and we shall see. So they grew up. So one boy gave a letter to me to be taken to mother when he was 21. He said, at that time, mother, you told me that I should grow. Now I feel I have grown up. I am 21. Then mother asked me, why does he want occultism? Then she said, first one must acquire spiritual consciousness. Then I will teach him occultism. So ask him to do yoga. And then he can come to me for occult practice, occult knowledge.
Some people do miracles and they give some tavis and
Yeah.
so many things. Is it a good thing or a good thing?
But they always have an explanation that they do it to create faith in people. They say people have become irreligious, they have no faith in God. To create faith, we do these things. Whether faith cannot be created by more spiritual means like the impact of one's personality, the stamp of one's will on the environment, and whether one needs to do these cheap tricks to canvass faith for in God. These are questions left to common sense.
Where we could learn more about this knowledge through identity and
It is the one book that discusses threadbare this question of knowledge by identity is Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine. He speaks of 7 kinds of knowledge, 7 kinds of ignorance, 7 kinds of knowledge to offset those ignorances, and how the human consciousness has to and will develop this knowledge by identity. Volume 2 of Life Divine.
This knowledge by identity, it is not only in the body, it must be on every level.
Yes. It is knowledge in the consciousness. Consciousness is spread from top to toe. It depends upon where you are more conscious. Normally, man being a mental being, he is conscious more here. So in him, that knowledge by identity is likely to be available at that level. But when you aim at an integral perfection and integral realization, you should be able to feel it at all levels of your being. And Mother says that to feel it in the body is the most direct. Because on the physical plane, the physical is the chosen means of expression, the means of manifestation.
The mental dishonesty that she mentions, she says at one point, since it's not a question of preservation, why is it that that spontaneous thing goes on so persistently in such inconsequential things? Is there a reason evolutionarily for that?
It is because there is that hold of inconscience opposed to consciousness, hold of darkness opposed to light. This nether hold of the lower elements, lower nature, seizes every little opportunity to give a twist to your consciousness, to forge a groove, you see, in which you can always, your consciousness will move. It is an interested activity which we have to consciously negative. Even in small inconsequential matters, we tell lies. We justify to ourselves. There is no need to it. But still one does. It is not simple and innocent affair. There is something that goads us to it. After some time we justify it is inconsequential, it doesn't matter, this is not a big thing. But we forge the grooves and confirm the twists in nature.